The Civil and Environmental Engineering Wetlands.
Good morning, I'm Alexandra Sharp and I'm from Michigan.
Hello, I'm Victoria Wilson and I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Good morning, I'm Alexandra Lopez and I'm from Puerto Rico.
Hi, I'm Amber Bradbury and I'm from Chicago, Illinois.
Hi, I'm Taylor Lucas and I'm from Gainesville, Virginia, and we are the Civil Engineering Group and we studied stormwater management, but we focused mainly on wetlands.
So these are the key components of our presentation. We're going to first talk about stormwater management, then we'll move on to best management practices, then we'll talk about wetlands, which is actually the focus of our presentation, and then we will talk about the lab work that we did here at Villanova. So what is stormwater management? Stormwater management is just the control of runoff to prevent pollution and flooding.
So now we're going to move on to talking about best management practices, also known as BMPs. BMPs are basically structures that manage the quantity and improve the quality of storm water runoff. These include infiltration trenches, rain gardens, green roofs, and wetlands.
The first BMP we would like to discuss is an infiltration trench. An infiltration trench is a deep excavated space filled with materials used to filter the water, such as soil, rock, and fabricated filters. Infiltration trenches will usually be located next to impervious areas, impervious meaning that water cannot seep through the material that is used. So, for example, an infiltration trench would be located by a parking lot. So after a storm, the storm water would run off from that parking lot through pipes and into the infiltration trench, while the water will then be filtered and put back into the groundwater supply. The next BMP is a rain garden. A rain garden is an area of depressed land filled with vegetation. It's beneficial because it can collect a great amount of stormwater. This is because the land is depressed, the water flows in the direction of the depressed land, and it can collect that water. So this allows for plant life to exist, and it requires little space, so it can be put in places like cities. Another BMP is a green roof, and this is a rooftop garden filled with vegetation as well. This is beneficial because it reduces the amount of stormwater runoff reaching the ground. So because it's on a roof, the water goes into the plants that are located up higher instead of going into the drainage system. This is also beneficial because it can be located in cities on a roof.
So now we're going to move on to wetlands, which is the focus of our presentation. So a wetland is just a swampy or marshy area that is used to filter stormwater runoff before the water is released to another body of water. And components of a wetland include that the water must constantly be flowing, it can never be standing still. The soil that is packed into the bottom of the wetland so that the water doesn't seep through to the groundwater before it's filtered. And then the vegetation that actually filters the pollutants out of the water.
So a wetland can be constructed one of the two ways. The first way is that it's naturally made, and this is when the environment has an area of land that naturally ponds, meaning the water collects there. So the stormwater might flow into that pond, or a big group of water that's being collected and then flow into another body of water. Another way a wetland can be constructed is if it's man-made. So people will usually go to an area that is already swamp-like, and they will compact the soil and shape it in the form that they'd like it to be in. And they will also add a liner under the topsoil so that the water flowing in the wetland will not flow directly into the groundwater supply.
So for the general structure of a wetland, right here where the inlet is. So after stormwater runoff, it flows into a drains, and then from the drains, it enters into pipes, and the pipes let out right here where the two red arrows are into the inlet. So the inlet's like the main area where the pollutants and all like the dirty water is. So to get rid of that, it then enters the sediment forebay, which is like depressed land, and it helps like all the larger sediments fall out. And then it enters into a meander, which is like in the shape of an M right here. And the meander is like an area of vegetation that helps filter out the water and filter out the pollutants so it'll be cleaner. And then it enters the outlet right here, which is, in the end, it should be cleaner than the inlet. And then after the outlet, it enters into a bigger body of water, such as the Delaware River. And a meander is a twisting body of water that helps filter out the water in a wetland. And it's usually shaped in like an M or an S to maximize space. And this is helpful because it increases the retention time. And with increased retention time, it helps filter out the water longer so that in the end it's cleaner.
So, as mentioned before, wetlands are used to enhance the quality of their water, but sometimes some of the water is not purified as much as others. This is exemplified with a large storm, in which water rushes into the system through the meanders and exits faster than it usually would. So here, the water quality would be worse. But in a small storm, the water quality is better because the water is contained in the wetland for longer and is filtered for a longer amount of time. A wetland, just like any other BMP, has advantages as well as disadvantages. Some of the advantages include that its water, its plants, and its sediment all collectively remove multiple pollutants through chemical, physical, and biological processes. It is also one of the best BMPs because it is designed to collect excess stormwater to prevent flooding. It is also aesthetically pleasing when it is properly landscaped, and it provides an excellent habitat for the wildlife. Some of the disadvantages include that it occupies too much space, and it needs to meet some water requirements in order to be healthy and functioning. Finally, poorly maintained wetlands can be colonized by invasive species. So the plants in a wetland are purposely chosen because they can withstand different weathers, but the invasive species, they take over and they choke out these native wetland plants.
The state of Pennsylvania Wetland Guide requires wetlands to remove 85% of total suspended solids, 40% nitrogen of the nitrogen, and 35% of the phosphorus in the water to be considered an efficient wetland.
Here are two photos of Villanova's wetland. This structure down here on this picture to the right is called a weir, and that helps to control the flow of the water going through the wetland. And Villanova's wetland, the drainage system that flows into the wetland covers 42 acres on the campus, and the wetland itself is 3/4 of an acre.
So now we're going to discuss the lab work that we did during our time here at Villanova. So one of the first things that we did when we began our project was we actually went out to the wetland and took water samples from various locations at the wetland. We took water samples from the inlet, so that's theoretically the most polluted part of the wetland, from the meanders, where the water is filtered, and from the outlet, where the water is cleanest. We tested for TSS and TDS. We tested the pH level and the conductivity of the water.
Okay, so there are two types of solids in water, TSS, which stands for total suspended solids, and TDS, which stands for total dissolved solids. TSS includes all those insoluble solids that can be filtered out of the solution. Some examples include dirt and algae. TDS includes all those soluble substances that cannot be filtered out. In the laboratory, we measured the TDS and TSS of the different samples to see how efficient our wetland is. Conductivity is basically the ability to conduct heat or electricity. It is measured in Siemens, which are reciprocal ohms, a measure of resistance. It is directly related to TDS because some of those total dissolved solids include ions, which conduct electricity. So the greater the number of TDS, the greater the concentration of ions in the solution.
Okay, so pH is a measure of acidity and basicity of a solution. And in order for life to exist in a wetland, it has to be in between 6 to 8. And if it's less than 6, 5 for example, algae will take over and all the species and the wetland will die.
So this is the data that we actually collected ourselves from the wetland. What you see here, BF, stands for base flow, so that's just the general flow of water through the wetland. Then these are the locations, so the inlet, 2 of the meanders, and then the outlet. Then what you see here is we tested for the pH, we tested the conductivity, the TSS, and the TDS. And on the bottom is the change. So the pH decreased by 2.4% from the inlet to the outlet. The conductivity increased by 13.2%. The amount of TSS decreased by 97%, and the TDS decreased by almost 6%. And then these graphs are just visualizations of that data. So this is the change in pH from the inlet to the outlet, and then this is the TSS reduction from the inlet to the outlet.
To conclude our presentation, stormwater management is important because it prevents physical damage to property by reducing the risk of flooding, and it also filters the pollution out of the water so that the water will be cleaner when it flows out into bigger bodies of water.
Any questions?